The red line is the Arctic in the summer. The blue line is the Arctic in the winter. That is perfectly explains that it's water vapor. It can't be CO2. It has to be water vapor that's causing. And look where the warming's taking place. It's in the Arctic winter where it's brutally cold, right? So I tell people all the time, yeah, instead of freezing to death in 10 seconds, you'll freeze to death in 12 seconds now. Basically, that's the difference.
My guest today is Joe Bastardi.
I'm a chief meteorologist at WeatherBell.com, along with Joe DeLeo. We're the two probably oldest, I should say, excuse me, most experienced forecasters out there now in the private sector forecasting globally. And I'm 68. Joe's a little bit older than me. And part of the reason for my skepticism on the cause of the warming, which, by the way, I think is very beneficial. It is actually making it easier to forecast, in my opinion, not harder. I think that the whole idea is that if we know what is actually driving the weather and you work in the weather every day, you can very easily see how this is not man-made climate change that you see going on. And when I'm talking about working in the weather every day, I don't mean being on TV and a member of the AMS and simply having to make sure that you do what you're told. Talking about globally forecasting, having to come up with forecasts 6, 9, 12 months away to give people an advantage. For instance, this winter, we were already laying out this winter from last March. At the end of last winter, some things became apparent. And part of that is because of the hypothesis that I'm going to explain over here right in front of you, because of the buildup of heat in the oceans, which in turn leads to the buildup of heat in the atmosphere. Where there's more energy available in the atmosphere, the signaling mechanisms are stronger. The weather events aren't necessarily stronger. They wash out. Some are stronger, some are weaker. But the signaling events, if you are looking at the weather, not the models, can actually help give you an advantage. And I believe that after 68 years on this planet, God made me to forecast the weather. And I'm involved in this whole climate situation because it's across and perhaps the crown of my calling. And it actually, I always explain this to me, the weather and climate get me closer to God. And after all these years, that's what I've realized. And I think that a lot of the stance that you see on the other side is arrogance and ignorance. The idea that, I have the answer to tomorrow. No man knows tomorrow. You might believe something about tomorrow, but believing something and having absolute knowledge of it means that you're actually trying to pretend you're God. All right. Now, for those of you who don't believe in God, hey, that's fine. I never try to get people riled up about that, except to say, why make someone else your God? Because if you're going to put your faith in a man or a model for tomorrow, blind faith like that, you're basically worshiping that. So it's a fascinating situation we're in, because I believe a lot of the stuff we see, Tom, I don't care if it's climate, COVID, whatever you want to talk about, a lot of the stuff you see is a battle between, if truth is a trait of God, what is non-truth, hiding the truth, distorting the truth? What would that be a trait of if there is this spiritual combat going on? So when I look at things in those eyes, for me, it keeps me sane, because I understand what might be going on in the background. People say, well, you're a conspiracy theorist. I don't think there's people that are purposely conspiring to do this, but I do think there are influences out there that would be designed to limit what man can do in his reach for the heavens. Reach toward, like Browning said, a man's reach must exceed his grasp, or what's a heaven for? And you see people, a whole group of people who seem to think that the idea is, well, we have to control the ability of men to, as individuals, to elevate themselves, because that becomes very dangerous to the overall social good. And when you do that, you are literally placing man and government and dismissing the good Lord above. So there's a bunch of interesting things. This has evolved it over my journey here, and the rest of the way in, hopefully some of it makes sense. But we have this PowerPoint here, and I wanted to show. I've been trying to show folks this for quite some time. I'm blessed, and I get to write on CFAC, and they let me put on whatever I want. I have a podcast called The American Storm, and I discuss a lot of those things on there. But I want folks here to watch what I'm doing, all right, and watch this linkage and moving. It's like in wrestling, I used to wrestle. We have something called chain wrestling, where you naturally react to something with the correct move without having to think about it. So this is all set up to me. There's 7-8 things in a row that go off here that I don't know how you deny that they're a factor, and a major factor, and perhaps the factor. First thing here is the rise of CO2 since the 1950s. It's essentially the start of the fossil fuel age. And you can see it's been, a steady, up, down, rise, up, down, rise. And the reason it goes down in the summertime is because there's more foliage on trees in the northern hemisphere, and that should be a hint that just plant more trees right there to counterbalance whatever man's putting into the atmosphere, which is a very, very tiny amount compared to what water vapor does. But here's the CO2. If CO2 is doing this, should have done more earlier. Now, why is that? Because if we look at Le Chatelier's principle, it states that if a dynamic equilibrium is disturbed by changing the conditions, the position of the equilibrium shifts to counteract the change to reestablish it. So here we start we're steady state on CO2 through 1930. We introduce CO2 to the whole equation, right? Nothing happens. Nothing really starts happening till 1990. And we're going to show the evidence of that. So I want you to remember that. I happen to be paying attention in chemistry class that one particular day. It's like think about anything that happens. Is suppose you get a virus. The first day it comes on, hits you, and then your body reacts, levels it off, and fights back. Right? Well, the atmosphere and nature has a common linkage. They're not just, oh well, this is like this is like that. There is something in the design of nature that is a link that goes right through. So if we move to the next one here, these are the sea surface temperatures, 1951 to 1960. There's a heck of a lot of blue. This is against the last 30 years, right? See all the blue? All right. So we move to 30 years later. All right. Now CO2 has been increasing constantly. All right. There's no changes. Now here for you folks who are trolling Tom and want to blast what I say, I want to ask you a question. Do you think for 1 second, if the oceans were as cool as they were back in the 1980s, that we would have warmed up the way we would? I mean, just go to the beach, for instance, on a hot day and watch what happens when a sea breeze comes in. So the oceans, while the sun is the grand conductor of all this, the long scale cycles of the sun, in decadal senses, decadal to maybe centuries, 1 century, the oceans are huge. They have 99% of the energy in the entire system. The atmosphere goes nowhere without the oceans. So essentially, while CO2 is rising, introduced to the system's saying, no big deal. What do I care, right? So let's move on. So the air temperatures, 1951 to 1960. Look at how cold it is in the Arctic and Antarctic. Now, this is going to be interesting because the relationship between water vapor and temperature means that small, very tiny amounts of increased water vapor warm it most where it's cold and dry. That is a huge key to what's causing all this. Because from 51 to 60 to 81 through 90, if we move to the next one, there's virtually no change. I mean, if there is some change, you could argue, okay, maybe that was CO2, but look at the Arctic regions and the Antarctic regions. They're very, very cold. Now, if we move to the next graphic, it's when the geothermal increase started, and God bless Dr. Arthur Vitorino. If you, Tom, have you ever had him on?
I have a couple times. Yeah.
Oh boy, he has become, because what happened was I started developing. I said, wait, the ocean can't warm this fast. What I was watching was hot spots going off, and then they disappear, but they leave the ocean a little bit warmer, right? And then these super Ninos would occur. And I said, wait a minute, this is not because of CO2. And sure enough, Dr. Vitorino supplied the information. Wish Yim was big on it. What really set me off was the 15-16 El Nino really got me to say, okay, that's the canary in the coal mine that exposes what this is all about, right? That it's directly linked to the increase in water vapor due to the warming oceans. And you cannot tell me the atmosphere is warming the ocean. That, it gets a little bit warmer and the oceans can't cool as fast. The difference in energy is so much greater. That's not the case. The oceans push around the atmosphere. But what happens, and this is beautiful. This is beautiful. And even though I have a disagreement with some of my friends on my side of the issue, here is my argument to them. The introduction of the increase in geothermal activity, all right, began, and then the ocean responded. Do you understand? It's very, very important. It's not only correlation, it's causation, right? Because we know that the oceans, with the immense amount of energy, lag input, right? So what happens is you see the input, the increase in geothermal. So you have this dynamic equilibrium in the ocean from the 1930s and 40s through 1990. Then is a new feature is introduced. So what happens? There's a reaction. Now, the Le Chatelierian principle says that every time there's too much of a buildup of heat, something has to happen. Boom, you get the super Ninos that go off, right? So, and they pump tremendous amounts of water vapor in the air. Let's go to the next graphic, all right? This correlation is amazing, all right? As you can see, the goodness of the fit is excellent. Expressed numerically, the correlation is between the mid-ocean seismic activity and heat content is 0.89. Coefficient of determination is, in other words, the correlation squared is 0.794. What this means is that the mid-ocean seismic activity, our proxy for geothermal heat release, is explaining 79.4% of the variation in the ocean heat content. That is remarkably high, and according to the regression model, the odds that it's this high of a correlation occurring by chance is, and you can't. Here's what I don't understand, and I've been hit a couple of times on this. I must be getting over the target. I saw Politico hit me, and USA Today hit me, and with good reason, because if I'm right, if this is right, it's all over. All right. I mean, this just blows everything right out of the water. Even though, by the way, I think the warming's beneficial more. CO2 is beneficial with CO2 Coalition. I love what their message is all the time. But in any case, I don't know how that's correlation. But what the big thing is, the causation is when we see it go off before, and then there's the reaction, then you know there's causation involved. So if we move to the next, the air warms more in the Arctic due to winter temperatures and water vapor correlation. I'm going to show this in a moment. And so you see what's happened since that increase in geothermal. The Arctic has flipped completely. It's almost, and so that gets factored into the global warming, right? So if you have approximately 1/3 of the planet heating up like crazy, and we're heating, say, well, it goes from -30 to -38 or something like that. That is factored in and distorts the temperature pattern. This has huge implications, because when you pull the heating away from the equator toward the poles, it affects everything in the weather. It affects because you have a distorted heating pattern, and the entire atmospheric circulation reacts to it. And thank God I am involved in the climate fight, because it is led to the ability to see what's going on further in advance, to give my clients, which are, we actually have to be right and get paid to actually survive over here. It's not like, oh, well, I got to, that's to knock, I'm not going to knock the government academia. They do a lot of valuable work, but there's not the kind of pressure, meteorology is a high pressure job if you're in the private sector over here. And with the Weather Service and the tax funded National Weather Service getting better every day, which I welcome that kind of competition because it makes me better. We have to make sure that we're out front. And one of the great advantages is, because of the AMS and the National Weather Service being the way they are about global warming, gives me a chance to just move in and fill the vacuum as far as what really is causing this, because they just want to say it's CO2. They're forced to say it, right? Me, I'm like going, no, I don't play by those rules. I'm going to go look at what I actually know. So now let's move to the next chart. Okay, this is very hard to see, but tiny amounts of water vapor warm it where it's coldest. For instance, at minus 40 Fahrenheit, the increase in 1/10 of 1 gram per kilogram of water vapor is correlated to a 10-degree rise in temperatures. So what happens when you have the oceans warming due to geothermal, and water vapor gets put up in the air? Where would you expect it? Where would you expect to see the most warming going on? Tom, go back to the screen before. Go back to the screen before, if you can.
Is that it?
You expect to see it where it's coldest and driest, right? So you see it in the Arctic and, of course, the Antarctic winter. The bulk of that is occurring during the winter season. This is the entire. This is January through December, and even the Antarctic, which is cold, even in their summer, is warming a little bit. But the entire year, you see it warming more in the Arctic. And if I put the winter up there, there'd be red pink palms in the Arctic. All right. So all that. Now think about. See, here's the bad thing about the global temperature. It's an average temperature, which all it means is that, if we're 1 degree Fahrenheit warmer than we were 100 years ago, means warm outduels cold by 1 degree. Over a period of 100 years, no human being can possibly detect that, and that's very easy to adapt to. What is not easy to adapt to is sudden cooling, which is what there has to be a concern to that, because the reason we may be seeing all this geothermal input is because the core of the Earth, if you look at the exosphere, has been reversing. That puts undue stress on the bottom of the ocean, which may explain the geothermal venting over the last 30 years. Well, that's about to stop. There's a cycle in the way, and this is above my pay grade, and it probably has to do with the sun and the planetary gravitational pulls. Now you get Moncton on here sometime. Okay, well, I'll stick with the weather part in this first part. You can explain, this the stuff that God needs to explain, because these guys are really, really smart with this. So you can see that correlation going on. So what the viewer and has to understand is that tiny amounts of water vapor will make huge differences where it's coldest and driest. And you see the Arctic's warming faster than ever. It's not warming during the summertime because there's not enough water vapor yet to affect the summertime temperature. And when ice melts, it cools the atmosphere above it. When it freezes, it warms the atmosphere above it. All right. So the process of freezing releases heat into the atmosphere. The process of melting does the opposite. So there is and this is why, if we had an ejected media, they should crucify in the press these people predicting the Arctic, the ice to disappear. It is physically impossible for that to happen unless it actually warms during the Arctic summers, which it's not doing. It may not increase as much during the winter, but it's not going to go to zero, and has actually been leveling off and coming back up over the last decade. So water vapor has increased about, it may be more 0.5 grams per kilogram in the age of geothermal spreading. And it explains the current rise in the global temperature. And what that means is that when the global temperature is 57, 58 degrees, if you get an increase, let's say, of 1 gram per kilogram across the entire planet, there's probably a 3/4 to 1 degree temperature rise. If we move to the next graphic here, let me see if I have that up there. Oh, okay. This is what I wanted to show. The red line is the Arctic in the summer. The blue line is the Arctic in the winter. That is perfectly explains that it's water vapor. It can't be CO2. It has to be water vapor that's causing. And look where the warming's taking place. It's in the Arctic winter where it's brutally cold, right? So I tell people all the time, yeah, instead of freezing to death in 10 seconds, you'll freeze to death in 12 seconds now. Basically, that's the difference. But it's blown out of proportion. And if people would kindly look at stuff, look, I get into debates with people and say, well, it's my opinion. Well, if your opinion is not based on looking at everything, right? I mean, the Apostle Paul said it best. Those who know what they know don't know what they ought to know. And there's a problem right there that you have a lot of people who know certain things because they only look at certain things. Hey, it's like this in everything. I mean, look, you got protests going on with people who don't understand the history of the Middle East for one. I mean, the COVID fiasco, which most of us, if you were a drug-free bodybuilder like I was, you understood immediately why you should not be putting something into your bloodstream, especially because once something, these guys that take steroids put needles, I don't know how they do it, but I can't stand to see a needle. But once it's in your bloodstream, there's no turning back. And you're going to use an mRNA vaccine for that, something that this is what's crazy to me. What makes you think if something is going to mimic COVID, the responses in other parts of your body aren't also going to be mimicked? Because what's a big thing about COVID? COVID attacks the respiratory system and the heart and all this other stuff. So what do you think that mRNA vaccine is going to do? It's going to try to do the same. So right from the beginning, I was naturally allied with the skeptical doctors who got just slammed for that. But what am I saying here? If someone asked me, well, if you were 70 years old with diabetes and 30 pounds overweight, would you get the shot? I think it would be logical to get the shot because you're at such a great risk with that kind of thing that the shot would probably lessen the risk. But if you're a perfectly healthy 22-year-old wrestler, right? Are you kidding me? Now the sword of Damocles is hanging over your head every time you walk out on the mat. In fact, I had one of our guys at Penn State the first year everybody was back from COVID. I knew for a fact that he did not get vaccinated, and I'm not going to say who. He was a national champ. He said, "Boy, it seemed to me like everybody else was getting tired real quick, right?" Which would go along with the supply of oxygen in your blood. There's 2 chapters in my book, and I wrote the book. The last book I wrote was April 2020. I wrote this. This was COVID was first coming out. I said, this is going to be the warm up for climate, which is exactly what you're seeing now. There's talk about controls with climate. Getting back to this, though, there's no Arctic warming in the summer. So what does that tell you? What does that tell you? If we know that water vapor, tiny amounts of water vapor, have a greater impact at very low temperatures, then it's got to be water vapor that's warming the Arctic. If the Arctic is your canary in the coal mine, where's the extra water vapor coming from? It's coming from the warming of the oceans. How are the oceans warming? Well, what's the one thing that's swept under the rug? What's the one thing no one knows about? What's the one thing that makes me a completely fringe knucklehead meteorologist? It's what you aren't looking at, you don't want to look at. And if you did look at it, it would question your dogma and actually your religion, because that's what this is turned into. It's turned into a darn religion. And anything that gets in the way of God is just something that, like I said before, folks, you don't believe in God. Hey, that's fine with me. But don't make climate your God. What is or John Kerry or Al Gore, for goodness sakes? Those guys would never debate someone because they'd be lost in 2 seconds. Let's move to the next one. I know this is Tom's podcast, but I come over, take over. The skin temperature, these are sea surface temperatures, the skin temperature of the Earth. Again, it debunks CO2. You notice all the warming that's going on in the oceans, and you notice all the warming. This is the last 10 years, which is quite a bit different from what we saw in those graphics back in 1981 to 1990, right? So it's warmed up considerably. And of course, it'll be warming up more in the Arctic. Remember, the Arctic's an ocean. People don't realize it's not like Antarctica. Antarctica is a continent. So different physical reactions to what's going on. Now, this is Dr. Roy. I don't even know if Dr. Roy Spencer approves of me doing this to his graphic. But if you did not look at the El Ninos you would say, well, there's a steady state rise in temperatures from 1979 to 2015-16. But that's not what's really going on. What's going on is when El Ninos go off, there is a step-up function. And you can see plainly the step-up function. This is over the last 30 years. Now, if we got this chart and we used it to 1979 to 2000 normals, it would be warmer. All right. So, and that's a problem on our side of the issue. We keep trying to portray this as, look, well, it's not doing anything. Yes, it is. It's moving up. But there's a reason it's moving up. Every time you get a extra buildup of heat in the ocean, that has to come out somehow or the other. The super Ninos go off. All the water vapor goes up in the air. And then what do you think is going to happen? So you see the step-up function. There's another one going on now. And is the reason you had record warmth is not only you have a pretty strong El Nino now, but you also have the input of a tremendous amounts of water vapor from an underwater volcano that went off 2 years ago, a year and a half ago. So what do you think is going to happen, right? The fact is, nature has led to this peak. The cumulative buildup, the increase in heat, it can be explained with nature. The CO2 is a beautiful theory, folks. I understand the back radiation, but I can't understand why someone says, well, the oceans are warming like crazy. Well, CO2 back radiation only penetrates the top millimeter of the ocean. How's the entire ocean warming because of that? Where's the input really coming from? The fact is that input began, and that's what we see getting the warming to go off, and then there's got to be a reaction to the atmosphere. It's Le Chatelier's. It's basic science, and because it's likely easy science, that would really be a problem to people who are relying on very, very complex ideas. To if you 30 years you've been doing this. I mean, it's hard enough for me to change a forecast in from 8-10 days out. But if you're 30 years and all you've been doing is preaching this, how are you going to turn around and say, well, no, I'm wrong? Oh, it'd be impossible to do. And especially if you're calling, you've got to divorce yourself from what your Heavenly Father has decided to call you to do. Suppose that your calling is to come up with the right answer, but you become seduced by all the fame and the fortune and being able to make just atrocious political comments that basically, like you see Dr. Mann now, he's he left Penn State, he's off the deep end. I mean, he's absolutely, I'm like, are you kidding me? Basically, I've eaten dinner a couple of times with Dr. Mann, and I always enjoyed his company. We never got involved in this. We just discussed our common love for weather. But I think, I don't use weather to try to make me more popular. I use weather to try to get me closer to God. If I happen to get more popular, if it's a fruit of my labor or people pay attention to me, hey, that's great, But there are guys in climate and there's some guys on our side of the issue. If the climate fight went away, what would they do? If the climate fight went away, every morning I get up, it's Christmas, I unwrap the gift. The gift is the weather, right? So it doesn't matter to me. And I keep trying to tell that to people. I have no dog in the fight. Probably economically speaking, it benefits my company if I just say, well, I'm wrong. Yeah, global warming is occurring because of man, right? Because it's gotten bad over the past several years where people are saying, our stockbrokers or our shareholders don't want a climate denier, giving us a forecast. I mean, this is ridiculous. I don't care. I don't care if it's snapping your fingers and eating Cheetos that's causing this or giving you the answer. If you have the right answer and I can benefit you, what do you care? If President Biden called me tomorrow and said, listen, I need help with a weather forecast, I'd be right there, serve my president, right? I may disagree with him about every single thing and let him know about that. But in what he called me to do, I would do it because I'm old school like that. You've got a completely different situation now where my stance on man-made climate change, when someone calls me a denier, that should raise red flags right off the bat. Especially someone like me who has studied these cycles so much and realizes that climate change is actually redundant because climate is always going to change over a period of time. And so you have to try to stay up with that. And we're blessed that this warming that's taking place is giving us a chance to see things more clearly. At least it's giving me a chance to see things more clearly. We're already out with a hurricane forecast for next year. Went out December 7th. The hurricane season from hell is coming next year. I think it's 05, 17, and 20 all rolled in together. Why do I say that? Because these El Ninos, because of the warming of the atmosphere and the way it's warming, the atmospheric base state is changed to what we call La Nina base state. In other words, it's warmer away from the equator. So if it's warmer, let's say over Asia, the Western Pacific, it's going to create stronger easterlies in the Pacific. And I get a kick out of these. Go, oh, look, it's cooling off South America. No joke. That's a sign that the global wind oscillation is leading to that because there's going to be upwelling. And the Antarctic current is going to get involved. So what happens is that La Nina base state that we see, it means that El Ninos, no matter how strong they get, they're going to go. They're going to turn around. You see the models. By next year, we're in the La Nina. Meanwhile, the Atlantic stays warm in the Genesis regions. It cools in the north. See, when the Atlantic is warm in the north and in the south, it distorts feedback enough to actually try to limit the amount of hurricanes. You might get more in the North Atlantic, but you don't get the ones that are going to be coming through the tropics. And we're just switching around in the kind of season next year, which could be, like I said, a hurricane season for hell. The very areas missed this year, there was no activity to speak of in the Caribbean. And I realized we had Idalia go up in the Eastern Gulf, but most of the tracks were well out at sea. This upcoming year is going to be opposite. They're going to be at the United States, just like this winter is opposite last winter. We said that's over 6 months ago to watch out. It would be warm through Christmas and flip around opposite of what happened last year because we had the big Arctic outbreak in December last year, which, by the way, my company called well in advance. All right. September 13th, we said there's going to be a major late season hurricane for Florida. 9 days before, I wrote on CFAC, attention, Governor DeSantis. At that time, there was just a little bit of cloudiness east of the Leeward Islands, but you can see these patterns getting picked out here. CO2 is 0.0042 of the atmosphere. Man's input is 0.1. That may be liberal. Some people say it's 0.05. U.S. input is 0.01 of the total. So here's the solution. Given those figures, let's crash the economy and make sure no one can drive a car. That's what you do. There's the atmosphere's energy. The arrow points at it right there. So if we move to the next one, notice what's happening. This is this La Nina base state. Notice that since the Super Nino of 97, you see how there's more blue than there's red. The El Ninos cannot. They come on strong. There's a 15, 16 Super Nino. And we're going to see that this was a pretty strong El Nino. It was about, as far as the atmosphere, the way the atmosphere works, it's not a strong El Nino so far. It is look, there's three ways to measure the El Nino. There's the Southern Oscillation Index, there's the Multivariate ENSO Index, and there's the Oceanic Nino Index. And what climate hysterics are jumping on is one of them, but it's the total picture that's very important. The Southern Oscillation Index is the longest running measure of the El Nino that we have, and we're not even in an El Nino as far as the atmosphere is concerned between Tahiti and Darwin, right? So I've developed something called the Bastardi Nino Index, which takes into account all three of them. And looking at this, for instance, this is a mid-range Bastardi Nino Index compared to 2016 or 1997. Now, why is that important? Well, it's important in that we knew that that was going to happen so that winter would not just be warm the entire time as you get in some of these El Nino winters. Anyway, if we move on, you see that change in the base state. And, okay, now, there are less clouds over the tropics opposite of their trapping hotspot theory. Look at the top figure there. You can see in the Central Pacific the orange, and you see in the Atlantic and Caribbean there the yellow and the green, and that indicates less than average against the 30-year mean of outgoing long wave radiation. Why would that be? Well, because there are more clouds. There were more clouds in 1951 to 1960. Look what's happened in the last 10 years. The blue indicates more outgoing long wave radiation, which means there's more sun, right? And guess where it's warming up? Guess where more sun is occurring? Over tropical oceans. And you notice what's going on over Indonesia there. And you can see in Africa, that's that La Nina base state. Because what's happened is there are more clouds there because the easterlies are stronger in the Indian Ocean and they're stronger in the Pacific. So what are they doing? They're creating more cloudiness further west because the air has to pile up. So this is a big change. And Dr. Willie Soon and the Connollys, they actually turned me on to this inadvertently. I don't know if they, it's like I don't know if they want to agree with me, but they told me a couple of years ago, I was in a meeting with them, and they said the Hadley cell has disappeared. What's the Hadley cell? Well, it's the circulation over the tropics, and the vertical velocity patterns over the tropics are no longer what they were. So now what happens, and this explains why these hurricane seasons go out of their minds every once in a while. What happens when you have 2, 3, 4 years in a row of more than the normal amount of sunshine in the Atlantic basin there? What do you think is going to happen to sea surface temperatures? You saw what just happened off Florida this year. You know why that occurred? That occurred because there's been a cumulative buildup of energy due to increased incoming solar radiation in the Caribbean, and of course you had the Gulf current come up, and you had a strong trough in the eastern part of the United States during June. That in turn cut the normal southeast trades in Florida, led to more than normal westerly winds. So there's a buildup of heat, and these guys are, they had sea surface temperatures hitting 100 degrees, but there's a perfectly natural explanation for why that happened, and that had nothing to do with CO2. It has everything to do, and some of you guys, maybe some of the hurricane forecasts in Miami, I see them talk, this is warm, water's so warm. Take a look at what's actually going on here, all right? If you have increased geothermal input with the thermohaline circulation and increased solar over the tropics, what do you think is going to happen? Okay, let's move on over here. So the models can't handle this. Here's what first of all, they can't figure out what's going on with the cloudiness, especially over the tropics. Secondly, what happens is if they see it warm in the north and not as warm in the south, they say, wait a minute, this has got to be washed out over here. So they wash it all out, make everything slightly warmer than normal, and then they feed back. And it's interesting that the only model that really caught this was the Russia model, which did not have CO2 forcing in it. And you can see that one model down there. So the feedback this feedback and the extra CO2 put into the models is causing the models to go haywire. Now, someone would say, well, it has warmed, Joe. Yeah, you're right. But if I tell you there's going to be 1.5 feet of snow in Minneapolis and only 2 inches fall, I could say, yeah, it snowed, but it didn't snow 1.5 feet now, did it? The climate models were predicting basically, runaway warming, and they're completely wrong. This is well within the range of adaptation. So I'm sitting here looking at this going, how do people, and I was a member of the Climate Action Committee of Pennsylvania for one meeting. I walked out of it. I said, I told the senator to appoint me. I can't sit in here. These people don't. When Biden's Inflation Reduction Act came out, basically that was the new Green Deal. So they were looking for ways to tap into that. And it was amazing listening to the ignorance that I heard in it. Like I told him, I asked him, how many trees are there in Pennsylvania? No one knew. So let me get this straight. You are sitting here trying to fight climate change. You know how many trees there are in Pennsylvania. So there's 5 billion trees in Pennsylvania. They get rid of a total of 250 billion pounds of carbon dioxide. Do you know Pennsylvania's 2022 energy-driven emissions of carbon dioxide were less than 60% of that? So basically the trees we have in Pennsylvania were already getting rid of the carbon dioxide from the energy sector. Why do you want to shut down the energy sector? Oh, that's not the mandate of this committee. It's amazing listening to them. And then you had one person come on and talk, she's given this presentation and she's saying we're basing all this on climate models. So I said, which model? No answer. Do you know what the climate models say? No answer. And, and the rest, let's just move on. Let me tell you something. The inmates are running this asylum over here. And I told the senator, I sent him a nice letter, and I said, here's my recommendation. Disband this committee. It's a waste of taxpayer money. That's what I said. Stop with the whole fighting climate change. Adapt to what's going on, all right? If you want to build the city of Harrisburg on a floodplain, every 40 or 50 years it's going underwater. That's all that's to it. So build better levees, right? Or whatever town you might be talking about. We're seeing more of this climate disaster and all this. It's raining harder. Well, it's also drier in some places too. So what happens is I would love to be able to put out a forecast where no matter what answer I give, I get credit for it. That's their game, and they get away with it. Let's see what's going on with the next graphic. It has warmed since then, but with the global weather stations, this is the actual weather stations across the planet. Back in, when was this? In September, were only 0.17 above normal. So over 75,000 weather stations where human beings live was only 0.17 above normal during the hottest time of the year, because most people live in the northern hemisphere. So I hear this story, climate migrants. How the heck can they detect that the summer is 0.17 Fahrenheit warmer? You can't. Over cross generations? This is nonsense. It's gibberish. It's being put out by agenda-driven people who, and they are what they call watermelons, green on the outside, red on the inside. I'm sorry. That's where we are. Let's go to the next one. Here's where the weather stations are. Convenient is that the Soviet Union has lost all their weather stations, so we don't know what's going on there. But in other words, where 95% of the human beings live, the planetary increase in temperature is less than 0.5 degrees Fahrenheit. You can't detect that. You're better off because of that. Cold kills more than heat. You get people like Hillary Clinton out of clear blue sky. Oh yeah, we have 500 million people have died from climate change. In what world are these people allowed to say that and get away with it? There's nothing. Or John Kerry, even 500,000 people. What are you talking about? All right. And I know they point, oh, well, they're riding around their planes. That's not the big issue. I don't care if they ride around. If you don't believe CO2 is a problem, you should not care about them riding around their airplanes, even though they get stuck in Munich because they didn't understand what was going to happen there. We did. We have a de-icing company in Europe, and we have them warned about what's going to happen in Europe in January. There are Europeans looking at this. You're going to see what's going to happen. Probably the epicenter will be Germany again. But all I'm saying, I don't care if they ride around their planes and spew CO2 in the atmosphere. I care about the CO2 is not garbage. What comes out of their mouth is garbage. It is easily in any kind of rational debate. And that's the other thing, folks. Where has the world turned? Where, I mean, you like watching football games, like watching basketball games, there's competition, right? How is it that we're not allowed to debate? You may have a presidential candidate this year that will refuse to debate. You have John Kerry, Al Gore, they refuse to debate. Yeah, I mean, in what sane world does an 18-year-old young lady with depression suddenly become the lightning rod for an entire global movement? I mean, and the idea that people don't stop and think about these things and get out there. By the way, I have a joke for you. This 22-year-old kid walks into a psychiatrist's office as a doctor. I am so afraid of climate change. I have anxiety every night. I don't know what's going to happen in 100 years. What should I do? And the doctor says, well, have you tried gluing yourself to the road? Like, yeah, well, what are you people doing? You're living in the best time in global history. Life on planet Earth has never been better. That's not to say we don't have problems. In fact, you know about the problems because life is so good that we've been able to see all these things. And we certainly should correct problems. But which is a bigger problem? Homeless people, people starving, 6-year-old kids mining cobalt in Nigeria? That's a far bigger problem than a problem of gradual warming that can be adapted to. I mean, and this is the kind of lunatic fringe stuff that is going on today, all right? Even if CO2, even if you believe CO2 is the driver, it's very easy to get rid of it. Build nuclear power plants. The fact that they don't do that should immediately expose them. Plant trees, all right? You plant more trees globally, and with the world greening, it's trying to offset that. And the third thing is, and there's a company in Florida that's had point of combustion carbon capture, never mind letting it out in that expensive process. And, the reason why I want the whole CO2, I got in a fight with Greg Wrightstone because Greg is a great guy, but he's like, you don't give them an inch and all this. I said, Greg, the fact is you can embarrass them. If you got the emissions to zero and it costs the planet less than $1 trillion to do it, as opposed to the $350 trillion it would cost the United States by 2050, that's what the budget says would go on. That's what you're looking at, right? You can embarrass them. Plus, when CO2 emissions are net zero, it will prove I am right about it being water vapor because it's not going to make a darn bit of difference. CO2 should never go to net zero because, as Will Happer says, we're in a CO2 drought right now. And maybe the advancement of man is helping to balance out that CO2. Where did it ever say that men are supposed to just stop reaching for tomorrow? When did that come into play? But that's basically what you're hearing. These people, anti-progress, anti-human, and anti-God, in their stance. They may think they're the opposite, but there are a lot of times. I mean, I could tell you because I bodybuild, I'm Mr. Olympia. I'm not Mr. Olympia. All right. I'm just like God. It used to be the joke of the gym. Hey, you look like Arnold Schwarzenegger. He's got 2 arms, and so do you. Right? It's not the same thing. Let's go on here. There's the thermohaline circulation. It explains why the northern oceans are warming up. All right. Where do you think that warm water is going? And why does it get, this is the Atlantic version, does the same thing in the Pacific. Why do you think it does that? Because where's the circulation going to go? Because of the shape of the continents, it's going to try to come north. It does it in the Pacific. I mean, there's a basin for it to do it. So that let's move on to the next one here. So it naturally pushes warmer water into the northern oceans. That's what happens. And if there's more sunshine in the tropics because of see, it's feeding back. It's feeding back on itself. It will do so until an equilibrium is reached. But there's nothing you could do. But I don't care how many EVs you put on the road, that's not going to stop what's going on, right? That's the biggest thing. If you get into a discussion with these global warming people, ask them, well, how much is this going to save? How much? Can you tell me what kind of temperature rise? And if they say, well, the temperature will fall half degree. Okay, well, then you want to starve 1 billion people because our agriculture is a little bit warmer, has been better for the greening of the planet, along with more CO2, which of course makes our planet more, makes the plants more resistant to drought and extreme. Obviously, if you give something extra food, it actually makes them stronger. All right, if it's balanced in nature. Now, if it's just eating nothing but pizza pie, that's a different thing. CO2 is not the pizza pie of diet. Okay. Anyway, if we move on. And there's the increase in the geothermal input. The question is, I know that says input, but it's input. The T is silent. The question is, will we reach an equilibrium? And what happens if this reverses? Because the warmer it gets, the harder it is to get warmer, and the harder it is to stay warm. So there's I expect a pretty big drop off in the global temperature coming up over the next couple of years, not down below what it was before because we had the El Nino go off, but certainly off this peak because this peak it was easy to see coming. I wrote about it as soon as that volcano ran over a year and a half ago. I wrote, oh, here it comes, right? And just like next hurricane season, if you right-wing people running for office don't get in front of this so that you understand and can explain and actually embarrass your opponent when they start yapping about hurricanes being a sign of climate change, you got to get proactive, not reactive. So anyway, what's the next one here? Let's see. Oh, good. Conclusions. I don't know what the heck is going on here. It woke up I don't understand where this cold came from. It's like the weather. I have to make sure I try to figure out where something came from. So you have geothermal input. You have increased solar over the tropics. You have a linkage to the step-up process in the actual temperatures. The Arctic proves it's water vapor. You have the natural reason backed up by Le Chatelier's principle as to why that happens. And you have the MEI, which is showing you, multivariate ENSO index, that's that chart I showed you, which is showing you the attempt to reset the equilibrium. I think there's another page here, if I remember correctly. Yeah, so the current warm spike is purely natural. Now, I wrote this back in the summer. So the La Nina reverses to El Nino, meaning another release of water. Actually, I wrote it last spring. That time, everybody's going, well, maybe there's not going to be El Nino, especially guys on our side of the issue. They know El Nino means a spike temperature, so you see them always try to fight it. I get into arguments with them all. They don't fight it. It's coming, right? La Nina reverses to El Nino, meaning another release of water vapor from geothermal input. The volcano last year goes off, pumps decades worth of water vapor into the air from that source. So what happens to the temperature? It spikes. None of these is from man-made sources. The amount of water vapor increase explains the temperature. I hope that is at least something to think about because it's all there.
Very good stuff. Do you have time for a couple questions here?
Sure.
I'm just curious, you showed that the UAH temperature kind of steps up since 1979 with the El Ninos. Is there any sort of step down process or what happens? Is water vapor going to go back?
Yeah, the way, yeah. So some of my friends, oh, that's going to continue to heat. Well, first of all, the warmer it gets, the harder it is to make it warmer. But secondly, as soon as that geothermal, it's a great experiment. Arthur, Dr. Vitorino and I talk about it all the time. We're going to be proving right once the geothermal starts to decrease. So, and that is probably going to happen within the next 5 to 10 years. So if we see it start backing off, we'll know that the live real-time experiment, that's the thing we do. We real-time test things without having peer review, right? So we'll see what happens. But if the geothermal levels, even if it levels off, there should be some kind of a reactive leveling off of the warming.
All right. And then getting back to your hurricane forecast, do you think that we might see a hurricane season as bad as those ones in the 1950s in the U.S.?
I'm already forecasting it. So, there's no backing away. Just like, back in the spring, we outlined what kind of winter we thought we were going to have. That's something that I believe is a huge benefit to the warming. If you can get the warming and line up, I can't do it mathematically, but I can eyeball things and use my experience and go back and look at analogs. If I can line that up, I now have a trend forecast for 9 months to 12 months out. In fact, I think next winter may be a lot like the winter of 2010, 2011, which came after the El Nino winter of 09-10. So, I wanted to get out. I've never gotten out with a hurricane forecast that early, but I really believe that it also gives us a chance to establish a date when we said something, so that when these people come along that weren't even looking at it and start claiming it's climate change, you say, well, how come I don't believe in man-made climate change? How come I saw it back there? So we have 25 to 30 storms. We have a lot of landfalls next year, and we'll see how that works out.
Another question is about what your clients really want from you when you do your forecasts, and what do they do?
Nail the forecast.
Okay.
Nail the forecast. Okay. So if everybody says it's warm and I'm saying it's going to be cold, or you're my de-icing company, if I'm telling him it's going to be a bigger than normal winter in Europe, he buys fluid, the ingredients in the middle of the summer. And, when the snow hits, his competitors are all trying to get, higher priced de-icing fluid. Therefore, he corners the market. Nail the forecast. But by nailing the forecast, people have to then wrestle with the idea, well, if this guy's such a whack job and out there in left field, how come he's seeing this stuff? And then that gives me a chance to explain some of these things, and also gives me a chance to answer the real question that I try to answer is, I don't know if any of you are U2 fans, but there's a song they do called Streets with No Names. And there's one version of it. I believe it's on the Elevation tour in Boston, where Bono, who I absolutely love, despite the fact I disagree with him on climate change, he comes out and he goes, what can I give back to God for the blessings he's poured out on me? And that is every day I go to work trying to answer that question. All right. I do believe that I don't believe I'm the most talented person in the world, but the combination of love, work ethic, and gratitude. Gratitude is so important. The chance that I have to work in something that I have loved longer than any living being. My mom and dad passed away a couple of years ago, so I have loved the weather longer than anything. And, it's kind of interesting. My dear friend Joe DeLeo just lost his wife. And he's just heartbroken. And I keep trying, I don't know. My wrestling background makes me want to, if you're sad, you get depressed. If you're mad, you rise back up again. And I keep trying to say, Joe, you've loved the weather longer than anything. And you're left with the weather, which is your gift from God, and your God. Your best days are ahead of you if you look at it that way. So I don't believe any of us are here that if we're focused on God above, I don't think you're here unless you have something that you're given to do, and you better darn well go out and do it, or otherwise you're going to wind up in a place where you don't want to be. I'm not talking about heaven or hell. I'm talking about inside. There's always something tugging on us, and it's the weather that tugs on me.
Okay, very good stuff. We're at the end of our hour here. Is there any other points you'd like to make before we wrap up?
Well, we have that podcast, The American Storm. I've got the book out. And look, if you're into the weather, you want to learn about the why before the what. You go to weatherbell.com. It costs it costs about $1 a day. But I constantly am trying to show things no one else is showing. Weather maps from the past. I'm not a modelologist. I use models, but the consensus of the models, that's being a modelologist. I'm a meteorologist that uses models, that's grateful for them, but understand that in the end, it is that human touch that gives you the advantage. A lot of this AI stuff in the weather, I watch that AI model every day. It's all over the place. They put out the graphics cast of Google. It can't see. It doesn't know, well, maybe I should go look at February 9th, 1969, because this pattern it doesn't know that stuff. And because the atmosphere is infinite and has stochastic events that cannot be anticipated, you can figure that, well, we got to watch for this, but I can't hit it exactly that day. I think it's going to certainly improve forecasting, but this idea that, okay, well, that's it. And what I got to tell you, as some of you meteorologists out there, do you understand you're building the road you're riding to your own death? By that, I mean, you're supporting all this stuff and it's going to make you obsolete. And there's no reason to do that. I could see if you're supposed to become obsolete. My wrestling coach at Penn State used to say, a good coach makes himself obsolete, right? Because if you've taught your wrestler everything he needs to know, then he's self-sufficient, which is fine. If it's the right thing to do. In this particular case, by just giving in without actually looking at things, you're simply, you guys, all these meteorologists on TV, why the heck do we need you? Right? We could just we could just get an AI up there and that's that. Right. So, I'd hate to be a 28-year-old meteorologist today. I wonder if I would have had the guts to stand up against this stuff the way I do now. It's like I remember Bill Gray telling me, he goes, I'm old now. I don't really care. Right. Now I'm sort of getting into that position. Right. The best thing I could do is be right for my clients, and understand that if I perform in the arena of my Heavenly Father and I'm doing what I was made to do, that, instead of worried about my ego and people pat me on the back, if I can hear the applause from heaven above, I'm in good shape.
Very good. So let's go ahead and end on that note, but thank you for taking the time. This is really very interesting stuff. Thank you.
Well, enjoy the weather. It's the only weather you got. God bless you.
Talk to you next time. Joe Bastardi. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.